The radioactive blood of human General Johnny Crawford boiled with unrelenting rage as he confronted his mortal enemy in the ruins of an annihilated city on the war-torn planet Demeter. Facing him stood Nesso, leader of the Elysian alien forces that had conquered and enslaved most of humanity. Around them, the smoldering wreckage of skyscrapers and blown-out buildings created a hellish, post-apocalyptic battleground. "Surrender, human scum," Nesso spat, crackling energy blade in hand. "Your homeworld is lost, your leaders are dead, your species serves us now." Johnny tightened his grip on his plasma rifle as the servos in his battered power armor whirred. "Earth belongs to humanity. As long as one of us still breathes, we'll keep fighting until every human is free and every alien invader is dead." Nesso laughed a grating screech. "You've already lost. Look around you. Your cities are rubble, your armies are defeated, your planet is a wasteland. What can you possibly do against the might of the Elysian Star Dominion? Accept your fate as our slaves." Johnny's finger hovered over the trigger. "You think you've won, but you've only awakened humanity's burning desire to survive and conquer. We'll never stop. We'll hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. We'll rebuild our strength, and we will take back our home, whatever the cost." Nesso lunged forward, energy blade slashing as Johnny opened fire. Plasma bolts and arcing energy clashed in a storm of destruction. This pivotal duel would decide if humanity's last desperate hope to reclaim Earth would flicker out or roar into an unstoppable conflagration. The freedom of the human species hung in the balance as these two warriors engaged in mortal combat amidst the ruins. No matter how many worlds the aliens conquered or how many humans they subjugated, the fight would go on until humanity triumphed or faced total extinction. The clash of energy weapons suddenly ceased as a massive shadow fell over the ruined city. An immense Elysian warship descended from the smoke-filled sky, its hull glinting in the hellish light of the flames below. The ship's plasma cannons swiveled and unleashed a barrage of destructive energy, forcing Johnny and Nesso to abandon their duel and scramble for cover amidst the rubble. Johnny slammed his fist against his suit's cloaking control, shimmering out of sight as he ducked behind a collapsed wall. Nesso shouted into his comm unit, his voice harsh and urgent, demanding reinforcements to crush the human resistance once and for all. Elysian soldiers swarmed out of the ship's deployment bay, their gleaming armor a stark contrast to the ruined cityscape. Johnny, hidden from view, used his suit's advanced sensors to pinpoint their vulnerabilities. With calculated precision, he picked off the alien troops one by one, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of lethal energy. Nesso, seeing his soldiers falling to an unseen enemy, called for a retreat back to the warship. But Johnny had anticipated this move. With a grim smile, he triggered a series of explosive charges he had rigged earlier. The ground shook as the charges detonated, sending the Elysian ship listing to one side. It crashed into the ruins with a thunderous impact, crushing scores of alien soldiers beneath its twisted bulk. Johnny emerged from the wreckage, his armor dented and blackened, but his determination unshakable. He opened a comm channel to the scattered human survivors across the planet, his voice ringing with fierce resolve. "This is only the start," he declared. "We'll bring the battle to the Elysians in the cities and in the stars. We'll undo the destruction they've inflicted on Earth, and we'll make them bleed for every bit of our world they've tainted." As the remaining human fighters rallied to Johnny's call, he turned his attention to the distant Elysian command center, where he knew Nesso would be regrouping. The war for Earth's freedom was far from over, and Johnny would not rest until humanity triumphed or perished in the attempt. Johnny and his band of human survivors pushed through the rubble-strewn streets, weapons at the ready as they advanced towards the Elysian command center. The air crackled with tension, the only sounds the crunching of boots on debris and the distant echoes of alien patrols. Suddenly, a barrage of plasma fire rained down on them from the shattered windows of a nearby building. Johnny dove for cover behind a burned-out hover transport as the rest of his team scattered. He peeked out to see a squad of Elysian special forces, their armor sleeker and more advanced than the troops they had faced before. At their head was Nesso, his eyes glinting with malice. "Take them out," Johnny barked, opening fire with his rifle. But the Elysians' upgraded shielding absorbed the plasma bolts like they were nothing. They returned fire with a punishing salvo, forcing the humans to fall back. In the chaos of the firefight, Johnny found himself cut off from his comrades, ducking into the twisting corridors of an abandoned factory complex as Neso and his warriors gave chase. He could hear the clank of their armor echoing off the metal walls, getting closer with each passing second. Johnny's mind raced as he dug into his pack, pulling out a handful of EMP grenades. If he could disable their cloaking devices, even for a moment, he might be able to thin their numbers. He set the charges at choke points and kill zones, using his suit sensors to track the Elysians' movements. As Neso rounded a corner, Johnny triggered the EMP burst. The Elysians' cloaking field flickered and died, revealing his looming form. Johnny opened fire, but Neso was on him in an instant, energy blades slashing. They traded blows in a brutal hand-to-hand clash, Johnny's armor barely withstanding the onslaught. As they grappled, Johnny spotted something on Neso's wrist, a strange device pulsing with an eerie green light. Seizing his chance, he lashed out with a laser cutter, slicing the device free. But Neso's blade found its mark, cutting deep into Johnny's side before he could fully pull away. Johnny staggered back, clutching the wound as he scooped up the severed device. Neso hesitated, his eyes widening as he saw what Johnny held. With an angry shout, the Elysian commander called off his warriors, leaving Johnny to limp away into the shadows. Hours later, Johnny regrouped with the other survivors, his wound hastily bandaged. He held out the device for them to see. "Looks like some kind of terraforming tech," he grunted. "The same stuff they use to poison our world. If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can use it to undo the damage, to make Earth green again." The others nodded grimly, hope kindling in their eyes for the first time in months. With the device secure, they resumed their march on the command center, cutting through the Elysian lines with newfound determination. But even as they fought, Johnny couldn't shake the look he had seen in Neso's eyes when he took the device. It wasn't just anger or fear, it was something deeper, something that hinted at a darker truth, yet to be revealed. Johnny and his team crept through the rubble-strewn streets, the Elysian command center looming ahead, like a malevolent beast. As they approached the outer perimeter, a shimmering energy field flickered into view, enveloping the structure in an impenetrable barrier. "Damn it!" Johnny growled, lowering his rifle. "We can't punch through that shield with the weapons we've got." "What now?" asked Sergeant Hawkins, his grizzled face tense. Johnny's mind raced. "Fall back to that abandoned research facility we passed. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." Inside the facility's dusty halls, Johnny and his team huddled around the strange device he had taken from Neso. As they worked to decipher its secrets, a voice called out from the shadows. "I might be able to help with that." A woman stepped into the light, her lab coat stained and tattered. Dr. Eliza Hoffman, her name badge read. "I've been working on something," she said, her eyes bright with a fierce intelligence. "A virus that targets Elysian DNA. It could cripple their soldiers, shut down their tech, but I need a pure sample to finish it." Johnny held up the device. "This might be the key. Some kind of Elysian terraforming tech. If we can crack it open..." A thunderous explosion rocked the facility, sending debris raining down. Neso burst through the far wall, flanked by a squad of elite Elysian warriors. "End of the line, human scum," he snarled, energy blade crackling. Johnny and his team leapt into action, plasma bolts and laser blasts crisscrossing the room in a deadly light show. Johnny and Neso clashed in the center of the chaos, trading blows with savage fury. As they grappled, Johnny spotted an opening. He lunged forward, sinking his combat knife into Neso's shoulder. The Elysian commander roared in pain, his blood splattering the floor. Johnny snatched a sample with a vial from his belt, tossing it to Eliza. "Finish the virus," he yelled as Neso rounded on him with murder in his eyes. Eliza raced to her makeshift lab, the sounds of battle raging behind her. With trembling hands, she inserted the blood sample into her machine, watching as it analyzed and replicated the DNA structure. "It's ready," she whispered, holding up a glowing vial of swirling, sickly green liquid. Johnny and his team, battered but victorious, gathered around her. "We need to get this into the command center's main computer core," Johnny said, his voice hard. "It's the only way to infect their entire network." They armed themselves and set out, Johnny leading the way through the twisting corridors of the Elysian stronghold. As they fought their way deeper into the facility, Johnny's memories of his time as a prisoner here flashed through his mind. The torture, the experiments, the relentless interrogations. He pushed them aside, focusing on the mission at hand. At last, they reached the central core, a vast chamber pulsing with alien energy. But as they approached the main console, a figure emerged from the shadows, Nesso, his body bristling with cybernetic enhancements and devastating new weapons. "Did you think it would be that easy?" the Elysian taunted, his voice now a metallic rasp. "I've transcended mere flesh. I am the future of the Elysian race, and I will not be stopped by a handful of primitives." Johnny stepped forward, plasma rifle leveled at Nesso's head. "Transcend this," he growled, as the room erupted into a maelstrom of fire and blood. The fate of Earth hung by a thread as the two warriors clashed, a battle that would echo through the ages. "Transcend this," he growled, as the room erupted into a maelstrom of fire and blood. The fate of Earth hung by a thread as the two warriors clashed, a battle that would echo through the ages. Johnny lunged at Nesso, his plasma rifle spitting bolts of searing energy. But the Elysian commander was too quick, his cybernetically enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge the shots with ease. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, his new weapons slicing through the air. They traded blows in a whirlwind of violence, Johnny's combat knife sparking against Nesso's energy blade. The human soldier fought with the fury of a man who had lost everything, his attacks driven by a primal need for vengeance. But Nesso was relentless, his mechanical limbs granting him an inhuman strength and speed. As his team rushed to upload the virus, Johnny knew he had to buy them time. He feinted left, then lunged right, his knife seeking a gap in Nesso's armor. But the Elysian was ready for him, catching Johnny's wrist in an iron grip. The bones ground together, the pain searing up Johnny's arm. But in that moment he saw it, the glowing power core embedded in Nesso's chest, the source of his cybernetic enhancements. With a roar of effort, Johnny wrenched his arm free, his fingers closing around the core. He ripped it free in a shower of sparks and fluid, the device coming loose in his hand. Nesso staggered back, his limbs going slack as the core's removal drained his strength. He collapsed to his knees, his eyes wide with shock and fury. Johnny didn't hesitate. He sprinted for the central computer core, dodging the energy bolts that flew past him. His team was pinned down, unable to reach the upload point, but Johnny had a plan. He reached the console, slamming Nesso's power core into the upload port. The system's security protocols flashed red, then green as the core's Elysian technology bypassed them. The virus surged into the network, spreading like wildfire. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the command center, Elysian soldiers fell to the ground, screaming in agony as the virus ravaged their genetic structure. Their weapons sparked and exploded, their armor shorting out and leaving them vulnerable. Johnny and his team seized the chance, fighting their way through the chaos. They cut down the crippled Elysians, making for the exit as the facility shook itself apart around them. Debris rained down, consoles exploding in showers of flame and shrapnel. They burst out into the open air, the sky above choked with fleeing Elysian ships. The command center collapsed behind them, burying the alien invaders beneath tons of rubble. Johnny stood tall amid the ruins, his armor battered and blood-streaked. They had struck a crippling blow against the Elysians, but he knew the war was far from over. With the Elysian chain of command in disarray, now was the time to press the advantage. Johnny opened a comm channel to the scattered human resistance cells, his voice ringing with fierce determination. "This is Johnny Crawford to all human forces, on Earth and beyond. The Elysian command has fallen. Now is our chance to strike at the heart of their empire. Rally your troops, gather your ships. We'll take this fight to their doorstep and make them regret the day they ever set foot on our world. As the human forces mobilized for the final battle, Johnny couldn't help but think of Neso, his once-hated nemesis. In those last moments, he had seen something in the Elysian's eyes, a flicker of doubt, of regret. Could there have been another path? A way to end this conflict without more bloodshed? But as he looked out over the shattered remains of his homeworld, Johnny pushed such thoughts aside. The Elysians had started this war, and humanity would finish it. No matter the cost, they would fight for their right to survive, to reclaim their place among the stars. The battle for Earth was over. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin. As the human fleet hurtled through the void towards the Elysian homeworld, a chime from the comm system shattered Johnny's focused determination. He opened the channel, expecting an update from Fleet Command. Instead, an unfamiliar voice crackled through the speakers, urgent and hushed. General Crawford, I have information vital to your success. The Elysian defenses are not as impenetrable as they seem. Johnny's eyes narrowed as schematics of the planetary shield flickered across his display. Instinct screamed that this was a trap, but something about the intricacy of the data gave him pause. He ran the transmission through every authentication protocol he could think of. It checked out. Who are you? Johnny demanded. Why should I trust this intel? The voice took on a familiar timbre. Because, General, I was once your greatest enemy. Now I am your only hope. The image on the screen resolved into a face Johnny knew all too well. Neso, his features haggard and his eyes haunted. Johnny's hand reflexively tightened on his sidearm. So you have every reason to doubt me, Neso said, holding up a placating hand. But not all Elysians believe in this war. A resistance has been growing, working to sabotage our own government's efforts. And now, with your fleet at our doorstep, we have a chance to end this conflict for good. Neso leaned forward, his gaze intense. The key is the main shield generator. It has a hidden vulnerability, a backdoor in its programming that only I know how to exploit. Get me to that generator and I can bring the entire defense grid crashing down. Johnny wrestled with indecision, years of bitter enmity warring with the desperate need for any advantage. Neso seemed to sense his hesitation. I know you have no reason to trust me, the Elysian said, his voice strained, but this is bigger than our personal vendetta. The future of both our species hangs in the balance. We have to put aside our differences and work together, or we'll both perish. A long moment stretched out, the silence broken only by the thrum of the ship's engines. Finally, Johnny gave a curt nod. Transmit the coordinates of the generator facility. We'll get you there. As the human fleet engaged the Elysian defenses in a titanic space battle, Johnny and Neso prepared to lead a strike team to the planet's surface. They were a strange sight, the human general and the Elysian commander, once bitter enemies now united by a common purpose. They made planetfall in a hail of anti-aircraft fire, their dropship shuddering as it punctured the atmosphere. The Elysian capital sprawled before them, its towering spires and gleaming domes a jarring contrast to the rubble and ruin Johnny had last seen on Earth. But there was no time to marvel at the alien architecture. As soon as they hit the ground, they were swarmed by Elysian soldiers, their energy weapons sizzling through the air. Johnny and Neso fought back to back, plasma rifle and pulse blade flashing in deadly concert. They carved a path through the chaos, the rest of the strike team fanning out behind them. Civilians scattered before their advance, some screaming in terror, others shouting in defiance. Johnny gritted his teeth and pushed forward, trying not to think about the destruction his own species had endured. The shield generator loomed ahead, a massive structure that thrummed with barely contained power. Johnny had expected heavy resistance, but the scale of the defenses took him aback. Rank upon rank of Elysian troops stood between them and their objective, backed by the crisscrossing beams of automated turrets. Neso hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. Johnny shot him a questioning look. There's something I haven't told you, Neso said, his voice strained. My family, they're being held hostage. The government suspected my loyalties, so they took them as leverage. If I don't succeed here, they'll be executed." Johnny absorbed this in silence, his jaw tightening. He knew all too well the pain of loss, the desperation of having loved ones in the enemy's grasp. "Then we'll just have to make sure we don't fail," he said grimly. They hit the Elysian lines like a thunderbolt, plasma and pulse fire ripping through the air. Johnny felt the familiar surge of battle adrenaline, his senses sharpening, and time seeming to slow. He could hear Niso's ragged breathing beside him, could feel the heat of near misses singeing his armor. They fought with a desperate fury, each knowing that the fate of their respective species hung on their success. Inch by blood-soaked inch, they clawed their way towards the generator, leaving a trail of shattered Elysian bodies in their wake. At last, they stood before the pulsing core of the shield generator, its force fields crackling with barely restrained energy. Neso stepped forward, his fingers flying over the control panel with a deftness born of intimate familiarity. "Cover me," he grunted, as the Elysian defenders rallied for one final push. "This may take a moment." Johnny and the strike team formed a perimeter, pouring fire into the advancing horde. The air grew thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh, the floor slick with mingled human and Elysian blood. Neso worked frantically, sweat beading his brow as he navigated the generator's complex systems. With a final, triumphant keystroke, he stepped back, a fierce grin splitting his face. "It's done," he said as the generator began to hum and shudder. "The shield will be down in moments. Your fleet can—" His words were cut off by a searing blast of energy that slammed into his chest, hurling him backwards. Johnny whirled to see an Elysian officer lowering a smoking pistol, his face twisted in a snarl of hatred. "Traitor!" the officer spat as Neso lay unmoving on the blood-slick floor. "You've doomed us all." Johnny didn't hesitate. His rifle barked twice and the officer crumpled, his accusations fading into a gurgling sigh. The generator was shaking itself apart now, the energy it had once contained spiraling out of control. Johnny hauled Neso to his feet, slinging the wounded Elysian's arm over his shoulder. "We have to go," he shouted over the rising cacophony. "This whole place is going to blow." They stumbled out of the collapsing facility, the ground heaving beneath their feet, as the shield generator went critical. In the skies above, Johnny could see the shimmering dome of the planetary shield flickering and fading, the human fleet surging forward to press their advantage. As the strike team piled into the waiting dropship, Johnny looked down at Neso, the Elysian's face pale and drawn with pain. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why turn against your own people?" Neso met his gaze, a wry smile tugging at his bloodied lips. "Because I finally realized that we're not so different, your species and mine. We both just want a future for our children, a chance at peace." He coughed, a trickle of dark blood staining his chin. "Promise me, Johnny. Promise me you'll find a way to end this war, to forge a new path forward, not just for humanity, but for all of us." Johnny clasped the Elysian's hand, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. "I promise," he said, as the dropship roared into the smoke-filled sky. "I promise." As Johnny and Neso fought their way deeper into the shield generator facility, the resistance grew more fierce with each step. Elysian soldiers poured out from every corridor, their weapons spitting bolts of searing energy. The two warriors moved in perfect sync, Johnny's plasma rifle barking and Neso's pulse blade humming as they cut a path through the enemy ranks. The air crackled with the discharge of energy weapons and the screams of the dying. The stench of ozone and charred flesh filled Johnny's nostrils, but he pushed forward, his jaw set with fierce determination. Beside him, Neso was a blur of motion, his cybernetically enhanced reflexes, allowing him to dodge and weave through the hail of fire. As they approached the generator's control room, a figure stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. Johnny recognized him instantly from Neso's memories, General Zaxxon, Supreme Commander of the Elysian military and Neso's former mentor. Zaxxon's face was a mask of cold arrogance, his body bristling with advanced cybernetic enhancements. "Nay so," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "I knew you would betray us, but to ally yourself with these primitives, you disgust me." Naso stepped forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. "No, Zaxxon, it is you who have betrayed our people. This war, this senseless slaughter, it was all your doing, wasn't it? You orchestrated everything, manipulating both our species, all so you could seize power and create your army of super soldiers." Zaxxon laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Of course I did. The Elysian race was stagnant, weak. We needed conflict to evolve, to become something greater. And now, with the technology we have harvested from the humans and the cybernetic advancements I have made, we stand on the cusp of a new era, an era of Elysian supremacy." He extended a hand towards Naso, his expression almost paternal. "Join me, Naso. Take your rightful place by my side. Together, we can rule the galaxy and shape the future of our species." Naso shook his head, his face hardening. "Never. I have seen the error of my ways, the folly of our arrogance. The path you seek will lead only to ruin for both our peoples. I will not be a part of it." Zaxxon's face twisted into a snarl of rage. "Then you will die with your human friends," he spat, as he lunged forward, a crackling energy staff materializing in his hands. Johnny and Nesso met his charge head-on, plasma bolts and pulse blades clashing against Zaxxon's whirling staff. The general was a terror to behold, his cybernetic enhancements granting him speed and strength far beyond any normal Elysian. But Johnny and Nesso fought with the desperate fury of those who had everything to lose, their once bitter rivalry now a bond of brotherhood forged in the crucible of war. They moved as one, Johnny's raw determination and combat experience complementing Nesso's intimate knowledge of Elysian technology and tactics. When Zaxxon pressed the attack, Johnny was there to parry and counter, buying Nesso time to find a weakness in the general's defenses. And when Zaxxon turned his attention to Nesso, Johnny struck from the flanks, his plasma rifle searing through the general's shielding. But for all their skill and teamwork, Zaxxon was a formidable opponent. His energy staff was a blur of motion, leaving trails of crackling destruction in its wake. Johnny felt the searing heat of near misses, the force of the blows that slipped through his guard, rattling his bones. As the battle raged on, the control room was reduced to a smoking ruin, consoles exploding and walls crumbling under the onslaught of energy. Johnny could feel his strength flagging, his armor cracked and his flesh scorched. Beside him, Nesso was in no better shape, his cybernetic implants sparking and shorting from the damage. In a final, desperate gambit, Johnny lunged forward, throwing all his remaining strength into a single mighty blow. His plasma rifle clashed against Zaxxon's energy staff, the two weapons locked in a sizzling deadlock. With a roar of effort, Johnny wrenched his rifle to the side, twisting Zaxxon's staff out of alignment. The feedback from the two energy fields meeting was instantaneous and catastrophic. The staff shattered, exploding into 1,000 shards of crackling energy. The blast hurled Johnny and Nesso back, slamming them into the ruined walls of the control room. Zaxxon screamed as the energy surge overloaded his cybernetic systems, his body convulsing with a series of explosions and electrical discharges. When the smoke cleared, the general lay still, his once mighty form now a scorched and shattered ruin. Johnny and Nesso dragged themselves to their feet, leaning on each other for support, as they limped to the shield generator's control panel. With shaking hands, they input the codes provided by the Elysian resistance. There was a deep, resounding thrum, and then a massive surge of energy that rocked the entire facility. On the screens, they could see the shimmering dome of the planetary shield flicker and die, the Elysian defenses laid bare. High above, the human fleet seized their chance. A rain of orbital fire descended on the planet's surface, the sky lighting up with the flashes of 1,000 energy beams and the trails of 1,000,000 missiles. The Elysian defenses crumbled under the onslaught, their ships and weapons no match for the raw power of the human armada. As the bombardment reached a crescendo, the entire facility shook itself apart, the last of its energy reserves overloading in a cataclysmic explosion. Johnny and Nesso sprinted for the exit, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. They burst out into the open air, the once proud Elysian capital now a smoking ruin around them. The human dropships were already descending, their hulls glinting in the sun as they disgorged wave after wave of soldiers. Johnny and Nesso stood amidst the rubble, battered and bloodied but alive. They looked to the sky, to the ships that heralded a new era, and knew that the long war was finally over. But as they watched the human forces secure the planet, as they saw the haunted looks in the eyes of the Elysian survivors, they knew that the true battle was just beginning. The battle to heal the deep scars that the conflict had left on both their species, to find a way forward that didn't lead to more bloodshed. It would be a long and difficult road, fraught with mistrust and resentment on both sides. But as Johnny and Nesso clasped hands, human and Elysian united in common purpose, there was a glimmer of hope. Hope that from the ashes of war, a new understanding could rise. The task ahead. As the dust settled over the ruins of the Elysian capital, Johnny and Nesso emerged from the rubble, their armor scorched and battered. They were greeted by a chorus of cheers from the human and Elysian resistance fighters who had fought alongside them, their faces alight with the joy of hard-won victory. But the celebration was short-lived. A frantic transmission crackled over the comm channels, the voice on the other end strained with fear and urgency. "This is Scout Team Alpha. We've detected a massive energy signature in orbit, emanating from a previously unknown Elysian facility. It's a superweapon capable of destroying entire planets, and it's targeting Earth." Johnny and Nesso exchanged a grim look. They knew that some of Zaxxon's most fanatical followers had escaped the fall of the capital, but they hadn't anticipated this. The Elysian splinter faction had taken control of the orbital platform, determined to enact their twisted vision of Elysian supremacy, even if it meant the annihilation of humanity. There was no time to waste. Johnny and Nesso gathered their most trusted allies, including Dr. Eliza Hoffman and a group of Elysian resistance fighters with intimate knowledge of the platform's defenses. Together, they boarded a swift assault craft and rocketed into orbit, the blue curve of Earth falling away beneath them. As they approached the orbital platform, they were met with a wall of fire. The Elysian fanatics had anticipated their attack and had arrayed a formidable defense, with squadrons of fighter craft and batteries of point defense cannons. The assault craft shuddered as it took hits, its shields flaring with each impact. But the joint human-Elysian strike force was undeterred. With Johnny at the helm and Nesso manning the weapons, they wove through the enemy fire, using daring maneuvers and clever feints to punch through the defensive screen. The Elysian resistance fighters, with their insider knowledge, guided them to a vulnerable point in the platform's hull. With a teeth-rattling impact, the assault craft slammed into the platform, its reinforced prow crumpling as it tore through the outer armor. Johnny and Nesso were the first ones out, leaping from the smoking wreckage with weapons drawn. Inside the platform, the battle was fierce and chaotic. The Elysian fanatics fought with the zeal of true believers, their eyes alight with a fervor that bordered on madness. They were heavily armed and well entrenched, turning the platform's labyrinthine corridors into a deadly gauntlet. But Johnny and Nesso were relentless. They fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized, as if they could read each other's thoughts. Johnny's plasma rifle flashed and barked, cutting down Elysian soldiers with precise bursts. Nesso was a whirlwind of motion, his pulse blade humming as it sliced through armor and flesh. They fought their way deeper into the facility, the rest of the strike team fanning out behind them. Automated defense turrets swiveled to track their movement, filling the air with a storm of energy bolts. But Eliza was ready for them, her fingers flying over a portable hacking device. One by one, the turrets sparked and went dead, their threat neutralized. As they battled closer to the superweapons control center, a chilling realization dawned. The weapon was already in the final stages of its charging sequence, its power levels climbing higher with each passing second. There would be no way to stop it once it reached full charge. With desperation lending speed to their steps, Johnny and Nesso fought their way to the reactor core. If they could overload it, the resulting explosion would destroy the entire platform, the superweapon along with it. But as they prepared to make their final push, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Admiral Zaran, Nesso's former commanding officer, and now the leader of the Elysian fanatics. His face was twisted with hatred, his eyes burning with an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. "You treacherous filth," he snarled, his gaze locked on Nesso. "You betrayed your own kind, sided with these primitives, but it doesn't matter now. The weapon will fire, and the human scourge will be wiped from the galaxy. Elysian supremacy will be assured, even if I have to kill you to make it happen." He raised his weapon, a massive energy cannon, and pointed it squarely at Johnny and Nesso. The air crackled with the build-up of power, the barrel glowing white-hot. With a roar of fury, Zaran pulled the trigger. In a split second, Nesso made his choice. He lunged at Xandar in a desperate tackle, the two Elysians crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. They grappled fiercely, each trying to overpower the other. Nesso grunted as he struggled to pin his brother down, the muscles in his arms straining with the effort. Johnny saw his opening. He sprinted to the reactor controls, his fingers flying over the console as he initiated the overload sequence. The chamber shook as the reactor's power surged, alarms blaring in warning. But Xandar was relentless. With a roar of fury, he broke free from Nesso's grip and charged at Johnny, plasma sword raised for a killing blow. Nesso moved without hesitation. He threw himself between Xandar and Johnny, his body a shield. The plasma sword pierced his chest with a sizzle of burning flesh, the blade erupting from his back in a spray of blood. Johnny screamed in rage and anguish. He brought his rifle up and unleashed a storm of plasma bolts, driving Xandar back. The Elysian fanatic staggered under the onslaught, his sword falling from his grip. Nesso slumped to his knees, blood bubbling from his lips. With a trembling hand, he reached out and slammed his fist down on the self-destruct control. A countdown began, red numbers ticking down inexorably. "Guys," Nesso rasped, his voice thick with pain. "Get out of here, Johnny. Finish this." Johnny hesitated, torn between the desire for vengeance and the need to escape. But the urgency in Nesso's fading eyes spurred him to action. He scooped up the fallen Elysian's body, cradling him close as he ran for the escape pods. The rest of the team was already there, urging him to hurry. Johnny stumbled into the pod, laying Nesso gently on the floor. The hatch sealed with a hiss, and the pod blasted free from the station, moments before the reactor reached critical mass. The orbital platform exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave buffeting the tiny escape craft. Through the viewport, Johnny watched as the debris cloud expanded, the station and the superweapon reduced to glowing embers. In his arms, Nesso shuddered, his life slipping away. Johnny held him tighter, hot tears stinging his eyes. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why did you do it?" Nesso smiled faintly, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "Because you were right," he breathed. "The cycle of hate. It has to end. This is the only way, a new beginning, for both our people." His eyes drifted closed, his body going still. Johnny bowed his head, grief ripping through him like a blade. He had lost more than a comrade. He had lost a friend, a brother in arms. The escape pod hurtled towards the Elysian homeworld, its occupants battered and weary. As they entered the atmosphere, they were intercepted by the human fleet, escorted to the flagship under heavy guard. Johnny emerged from the pod to a hero's welcome, the cheers of his fellow soldiers ringing in his ears. But he felt no joy, no sense of triumph. The cost had been too high. Earth was a ruin, its cities shattered and its people traumatized. And though the Elysians were defeated, the hard work of rebuilding and reconciliation had only just begun. There would need to be trials and reparations, and the slow, painful process of learning to live in peace. Johnny looked out over the war-torn landscape, his heart heavy. The road ahead would be long and difficult, and he would have to walk it without Nesso by his side. But he was determined to see it through, for the sake of his species, for the memory of the friend he had lost, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. No matter how hard it would be, he would not rest until both humans and Elysians could live free from the shadow of war. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.